In the last lecture, we saw how we use model validations and why are they important to our API. In this lecture, we will go on and to our endpoints which are exposed to the clients, which is the controllers, we will add these validations. So let's start with one controller first. Let's start with our regions controller. In here, we want to act on those endpoints that are accepting data. As you can see, the get operations don't accept data. This one does, but that's in the route, and if this is a informatted GUID, it will give us a 404 anyway because it is unable to match to a route. After that, we are getting the request in the create and the update endpoints. So we need to validate the create and update the endpoints for the region controller and in the Vox controller. And we do model validations using data annotations on the request DTO. And we can use it and we can then see model state of this model to see if it is valid or not. So let's first work on the create method of the regions controller. Let's open the add region request DTO and add some data annotations to it and make it, add validations to it. We have three properties in here, which is the code, name, and the region image URL. Now, out of these three properties, we want two of these to have a value. These two properties can never be null. So we can add a required data attribute to it. So inside square brackets, I can write required. And this is coming from system.componentModel.dataAnnotations. So ASP.NET Core has built-in data annotations that we can use, and we can then use the model state to validate our model. So I will mark this code property as required, and I will also mark the name property as required because they both are not nullable. Finally, this one is not required because it's an optional parameter, so I won't apply the required data annotation to this property. After that, let's say you have a certain condition on the code. Because we know code is, for example, for an Auckland region, it's AKL, so it's around the three character mark. So let's say if your application or your business decides to go on with that validation, that code will always be 3 characters. I can have a min and max length check on the code field. For example, ASP.NET Core also provides us with min and max length checks. So I'll first add a min length and say min length is 3. And if you have a different use case, you can say min length is 0. And I will also add a max length similar to the min length, and I will keep this the same because for our business case I will say code always has to be 3 characters long. So I've added these over here. As an optional parameter, you can also specify the error message that will show up when this validation is not met. So let's say, for example, as a string I can say code has to be a minimum of 3 characters, something like that. And this is the error message. So I'll say error message is equal to this. And I can also add the error message to the max length. Inside the round bracket, I'll say error message for this one is code has to be a maximum of 3 characters, and you can change the wording as per your liking as well. So we have added data annotations that is checking the min and max length of this. So let's say we also add a max length property to the name. So we want, let's say, at least a max of 100 characters, and we'll say name has to be a maximum of 100 characters. And cannot go above it, something like that. So now that we have defined the validations that we want on these properties of this model, we can come back to the region controller where we have the create method and we want to check for these validations. So we can use the model state dot is valid property. So this is a property that we get along with model state, and we can use this property. It returns a boolean saying if this model over here was a valid model or not, and we can use it inside an if statement like this. So we'll say if model state is valid, then go on and do whatever you were doing, and otherwise we can return a bad request. And as you know, if the validation is not met, we can return a bad request with the model state object inside it. So with that change, it's now time to test our create method, and we'll try to put junk values in and see how our application responds to it. So I will run my application. The application is running, and I'll come to the regions endpoint, and I made changes to the post method, which is creating a new region. So click on try it out, and in here I have to modify the code so that it is, let's say, just one character. So let's say just that, and just put anything over here, a valid name, and this can be null. If I send the values to the API, let's see what happens. If I scroll down, I get a 400 bad request over here, which means our model was not valid. And in the response body, it says that one or more validation errors occurred, and it says status of 400. And the code in the errors say that code has to be maximum of 3 characters. So there are errors on the code property inside this model. So we have seen this message that we passed from the model. Now let's say if we are passing 4 characters or more. So let's execute this. And if you see here, the message changed, and now it is showing the message for the max length property or the max length check. So now we can see a different message. And if everything was fine, let's say this is ABC, and I'm passing this as null, but we can't receive null because this is a required field. And if we execute this now, we get a 400 response back again saying that the name field is required. So you see how easy it is to implement model state validations into our API, and we have just done it for one of these endpoints. And we have the model state.isValid property that just tells us if the model is valid or not. We will go on and add these validations to the other APIs that we have, that is the update. So let's stop the application and let's add the model validation to the update region request as well. And similar to the before, the add region request, which I can just open from here, I can basically copy it because the validations ideally are the same on add and update, because our business is requiring that. So I'm copying the same validations in the update. If you have requirements for a different validation, you can totally go ahead and add the data annotations as per your liking or the business requirements. So now that this is done, I can now have the same model state validation over here. So let's say if model state dot is valid, then we go on and update our region, and otherwise we return a bad request and we return the model state in that bad request. And with that, we have validated 2 of our endpoints. So now we can switch to the Vox controller, which will have 2 endpoints as well, the create and the update. So let's go on and validate the create first. So add Vox, and in here let's see what required properties we have. So I need the the name to be required, then the description to be required, length. The image is not required, but I do need the difficulty ID and the region ID. So all these are required fields apart from the Vox image URL. After that, let's use the same name, like let's say a minimum of something on the name. So a max length of, let's say 100 on the Vox, and for the description, let's say it's 1000 characters. on the description. And length, let's say length has a range of something. So we also have a range over here, which we can provide a minimum and a maximum. So let's say the minimum was 0 and the maximum was 50 kilometers long. So that, and then we have difficulty ID and the region ID. So with that, we have also given the data annotations for validations on this add walk request DTO, and we'll do something similar for the update as well. So update walk request DTO would ideally be the same. So I will copy all of this and paste it to the update model as well. So the validations have been added, and it's now time to block the invalid requests from the controller. So walks controller, on the create method, I will use the if condition, if model state dot is valid, then create this walk, and otherwise just return a bad request with the model state, because that has the collection of errors. And I'll do the same thing on the update. So I'll say model state dot is valid, then go on and update it, otherwise return a bad request with the model state. So with that, we are blocking all of our endpoints and we are blocking all the bad data from the endpoints. And if you test this functionality, it will behave exactly the same as how we tested the initial method. So I would suggest you to go on and run your application and test out the different model validations. And if you have different requirements, you can add different data annotations.